If I were to talk about what my favorite game genre of all time was, I would honestly have to say the horror genre, specifically survival horror. I'm not talking about those Outlast slop clones that you can only play through once because it's just set piece after set piece with you running away from brain dead AI. I don't know if you guys can tell, but I don't really like Outlast. The horror games I'm talking about are the ones where you're given finite resources, as well as an actual weapon allowing you to fight back against the monsters, which could be argued is actually scarier than being automatically defenseless, because if you run out of ammo due to being careless, that's on you, and that fear you feel hits even harder because you don't know how much ammo you're gonna have before a combat encounter, and it makes every single one completely unpredictable. Now, if I were to talk about which game within this genre is the best in my eyes, you'd probably expect me to say Resident Evil or Silent Hill. Well, my personal favorite is actually one that combines elements from both of them, and that game is The Evil Within. Which, if you're a first-time viewer, you're probably thinking, wait, isn't The Evil Within that one horror game that nobody really liked when it came out? And if you were asking that, then yes, you're absolutely correct. But over time, people have started to warm up to it, and personally, I think it could be considered amongst the ranks of Resident Evil and Silent Hill in terms of its quality, which makes it even more of a shame that Microsoft shut down the studio that made it. The Resident Evil comparison to The Evil Within comes from the fact that it was directed by Shinji Mikami, who is known for his work on absolute horror classics like Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 4, and of course we can't forget Goof Troop on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. That one's a real knee trembler, let me tell you. The Evil Within plays exactly like your standard over-the-shoulder Resident Evil game. You'll be aiming down your sights and missing 3/4 of your shots due to the immense amount of fear you're feeling during combat encounters. Now, the Silent Hill comparison comes in from the psychological horror side of The Evil Within. Both of these games take place in a hellscape with horrific monsters which are based around events, feelings, and trauma of a specific person, allowing them to go absolutely crazy with the monster designs. I think this combination of these two games is absolutely perfect, and it's one of the main reasons as to why I love The Evil Within. That and it was one of the first horror games I ever finished, so I guess I'm just kind of biased really. The Evil Within was the first ever game created by the newly formed studio Tango Gameworks. May they rest in peace. And you can kinda tell playing through it because it's a bit jank in places. But despite the blatant flaws, it was made by people who were very passionate about not just the horror genre, but games as a whole, and you can tell. The overarching plot of the game and where it takes place allows the developers and level designers to take full advantage of the fact that The Evil Within is a game. They take full advantage of this, pulling off some of the trippiest, strangest shit that can only be experienced in this form of media. It's full of moments where you're taken into completely random places by, for example, falling through a hospital corridor, taking a lift to the top of a city that forgets it's floating in the air and falls down. Honestly, I could go on about the crazy transitions this game has. While playing through it, you have no idea why all of this shit is happening, and it was one of the main criticisms for The Evil Within. Personally though, I loved it. Every chapter felt like a complete surprise. You had no idea where you were going to be trudging through, shitting yourself next. You constantly feel clueless throughout it, just like the main character you're playing as, Sebastian, who is my favourite survival horror protagonist of all time, in terms of his design at least. I absolutely love how he looks, and it's actually criminal that he isn't in a game like Dead by Daylight. If fucking Nick Cage can be in it, why can't Sebastian, huh? Well, this gruff middle-aged man was another problem people had with The Evil Within back in the day. They weren't too happy about the fact that Sebastian wasn't exactly expressive, like, in the slightest. The only expression he ever showed with his animations and voice lines was just sheer confusion. Sometimes he even sounded completely bored.
What the fuck?
It's obvious the voice direction was not great because Sebastian's voice actor is an actual professional actor called Anson Mount, who is known for his incredible acting in Hood of Horror, starring Snoop Dogg.
The Hound of Hell has returned, and all is not good in the hood.
I personally don't mind his rough voice acting at all. You can't have a good horror game without a bit of cheese and stupid ass lines.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
And The Evil Within does not disappoint. I actually find myself quoting a lot of the stupid shit Sebastian says while experiencing this insane shit.
Fire seems to work.
Another complaint people had about the guy was the fact we don't actually learn much about him in the story. We get hints that he's an alcoholic and something pretty tragic happened to him in the past, causing him to lose his wife and daughter, but none of it is told to us directly. We have to learn it through notes we find around the world, which is pretty stupid, I'll admit, but this lack of character for Sebastian feels deliberate. It lets us, the player, put ourselves into his shoes. The confusion he's feeling throughout the story is the exact same confusion we're feeling too. We're just as out of the loop as he is, because the evil within isn't actually about him at all. The story is more focused around almost every other character, because Sebastian wasn't even supposed to be pulled into the current situation he's in. Even the main villain sees him as a waste of time for the most part during the early game, only really taking him seriously the further in we get. Every other character has about 20 times more personality than Sebastian. For starters, we have the two officers who are accompanying him to the crime scene that starts all of this madness. Joseph Oda and Julie Kidman. Oh, and I guess the guy who drove them there, but he doesn't last too long.
What the fuck?
Joseph is Seb's partner, and just like him, he's completely out of the loop of what's going on too, and he's also suffering from some serious mental torment with moments where he says shit like this.
You ever had the urge to just jump? When you're on a high place? Or the subway rolls by?
I'm very mixed on him personally. I think he could have been great, but he's severely underutilized within the story. We're with him for like 2 chapters and then he vanishes, but we do meet him again later just for him to get shot, and that's the end of his story. We're told he survives the gunshot in the second game, so there was a lot of potential there for a third game to expand on him, but no. We live in this timeline, don't we? Unlike Seb and Joseph, Julie Kidman knows exactly what's going on, as she's undercover looking for a patient at the mental asylum known as Leslie. You don't quite fully understand any of this within the main story because you're playing from Sebastian's perspective, but in the DLCs you see everything from Kidman's perspective. But I'll get to them in another video where I go into each DLC of The Evil Within. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to see that. The other 2 characters I haven't mentioned yet are Dr. Marcelo Jimenez and Ruvik. I'll talk more about Jimenez in a bit, but Ruvik is important because he's the main villain of The Evil Within, and everything we're seeing within The Evil Within is actually taking place within his brain. Let me explain what I mean. All of the horrific nightmares you're experiencing are taking place within a simulation referred to as STEM. It's a system that allows multiple minds to be brought together and connected to create a mishmashed world created from memories. The way you can gain access to the STEM world is by laying in a strange bathtub referred to as a terminus, or by being connected wirelessly through a frequency, which is what happens to Sebastian and the others at the start. There's more to it though. The STEM system was originally designed by Ruvik. He made STEM as a way for him to relive and have control of his past memories due to a tragic incident, killing his sister Laura in a barn fire, as well as severely burning him and giving him a good old dose of trauma. During his time developing STEM, he kills his parents as a strategic way to inherit their fortune, and he would use that fortune to fund Beacon Mental Hospital so they would send him patients to use as test subjects for the STEM system. Marcelo Jimenez took an interest in Ruvik's project and exposed it to a big shady organization known within the universe as Mobius. They wanted to use it for their own shady purposes, and Ruvik knew this, making it so the machine could only work with his brain as the core hosting the memories within the system. He thought this would prevent anyone from stealing STEM, but it kinda made shit worse for the guy because Mobius decided to counter this by just cutting the guy up and shoving his brain in there so they could have access to it. After this event, Mobius found out that Ruvik lived on within the STEM system because people they were sending into it were just getting murdered on sight, and if you die within STEM, you die in real life. They wanted to replace Ruvik's brain as the host, and to do this they looked into patients that had similar brain waves relating to trauma they had experienced in their lives, and the one that was the closest to Ruvik's was Leslie Withers, who had witnessed his entire family get killed. Leslie was used frequently as a test subject by Jimenez, and he was able to navigate around STEM freely due to the similar brainwave patterns as Ruvik. Jimenez starts creating his own version of STEM in the background that could pull people in wirelessly, which is what is activated during the beginning, causing all of the shit we experience within the game. Ruvik knows about Leslie's similar brainwave patterns, and he guides him through STEM because he can use him as a way to escape the system within Leslie's body. Mobius knew Jimenez would foolishly pull everyone into STEM wirelessly, which is why they sent in their double agent, Julie Kidman acting as an undercover cop, bringing Sebastian and Joseph along with her, being unaware of everything. It's like a wild goose chase. Everyone within STEM is trying to get to Leslie, but Ruvik is the only one who manages to succeed in the end, and Kidman notices the influence he gains over Leslie throughout the game, so her goal turns into killing him to prevent Ruvik from getting back into the real world. While in STEM, Jimenez wants to get out too, and he tries getting to Leslie to use him as a gateway out of STEM, and Sebastian just wants to protect the poor kid because, well, he's a detective, he's just doing his job, and he's completely out of the loop of what's going on. All of that was a very basic summary of the plot, but I think this setup is absolutely genius for a horror game. The fact it's all taking place within a literal psychopath's mind lets them go absolutely insane with the monster designs. They don't hold back. Some of these are very fucked up. Every single one is based around an aspect of Ruvik's past and trauma, or they're relating to a certain patient's mental issues that unfortunately died within STEM. For starters, we have the Haunted, which act as your basic zombie type enemies. These are previous victims of STEM, and with their design you can see how much torment and pain they went through here, with some of them being covered in barbed wire or impaled with shards of glass. I love them in a fucked up kind of way. There are these bigger fucked up mutated looking enemies called the Alter Ego, which were victims that suffered from dissociative identity disorder, where it looks like them and their other identity have both simultaneously mutated and melded together. It's a horrific sight. That's only an example of the basic enemies. The boss's designs are like 20 times more horrific. Like Laura, this spindly specimen is supposed to be Ruvik's deceased sister. This is how he pictures her in his brain. What the fuck? She crawls along the floor groaning. It's so creepy. It reminds me a lot of The Grudge, which is a horror film I'm actually too afraid to watch. So obviously, to this day, Laura still scares me, especially when she does her fast scuttle. Fuck, go away. What doesn't help is the fact she is basically unkillable for the most part. You may think you've gotten her, but she's merely taking a nap, because she's always gonna come back and bash your fucking skull in. She is a powerhouse and is borderline indestructible. And if it wasn't for her weakness, that being the thing that killed her originally, fire, she would be an unstoppable force. Due to Ruvik's trauma from the barn fire, almost every single enemy and boss is weak to fire, which is where the match mechanic comes in handy. Once you knock down an enemy, or you're near a body, you're able to burn it with a match, igniting it and anything around it, which for normal Haunted is a one-shot kill. It's a very interesting mechanic. It pushes you to think more strategically with your shots, like maybe shooting a group of Haunted in the legs with your shotgun, so you can kill them all with one match rather than the usual headshot go-to. You save a lot of bullets doing this. It's a really good mechanic, and I love how it's contextualized within the world. Now, I can't talk about the combat of The Evil Within without mentioning the iconic Agony crossbow. This thing at a first glance doesn't seem that great. It has the least amount of ammo of any gun, and it's a crossbow. Why would you use this over, you know, an actual gun? Well, the Agony crossbow's unique element is the fact it has multiple bolts that can completely range in what they do. You have things like your standard bolt that impales enemies, an explosive bolt which can stick to enemies, and there's the free stunning bolts, which at a first glance you'll think are completely useless because stunning enemies doesn't do damage. Well, here's the thing. With the flash bolts, while the enemies are blinded, you can perform a one-shot stealth kill from the front. This also works on some bosses. The shock bolt makes Haunted kneel down on the ground, allowing you to drop a match on their heads, and the ice bolt literally makes them fall apart after freezing them. If you know how to utilize these bolts effectively, they can become absolutely busted, and they are essential on higher difficulties, especially Akumu. I can say this because I have my PTSD receipt. When killing enemies and bosses, there's a chance for them to drop this strange bubbling green goop. You can also find this stuff in jars scattered around, and this is what I like to refer to as green gel. With this unknown substance, you can actually upgrade Sebastian's stats through a form of electric shock therapy, I think. It doesn't look very pleasant. The way you can access this chair is by traversing to a safe room. This safe room can be accessed through cracked mirrors throughout the fucked up world of STEM. You know you're near one when you can hear Claire de Lune faintly playing. I love this shit so much. You just cannot beat this atmosphere. It's hauntingly beautiful. If you don't hear the music at first, you can always tell there's a mirror leading to a safe room if the door has a giant Beacon Mental Hospital logo slapped onto it. This logo being on the doors is for a reason, as the safe rooms themselves are actually an area that was in the asylum, and there's even a nurse lurking around who treats you like you're a patient. This was actually where Leslie was treated. That exact chair where you level up is exactly where he had his electric shock therapy, and the nurse was the one caring for him. This safe area is here for a reason. Due to Leslie's similar brainwaves to Ruvik, he's able to create this safe haven away from everything horrific, and he must have taken a liking to Sebastian because he's the only one who's able to get access to this area. However, the place slowly starts to break down the closer Ruvik gets to taking over Leslie. The further into the game you get, there are random moments that can occur, like Ruvik forcing Sebastian out of there by using a fake version of Leslie with a mirror on his face, to even transforming the area entirely to a catacomb you'll be seeing later within the game. Not to mention how much it breaks down, and you see it all visually with the wallpaper cracking and peeling with random debris scattered around. During the final chapter, the end room just ceases to exist entirely. What I just described is one of the main reasons why I love The Evil Within. The game is not about Sebastian. He technically isn't even the main character if you really think about it. Everyone else around him pulling the strings are. Throughout everything, we are just as clueless as Sebastian, and he's literally nothing within the world. If it wasn't for his training within the Force, he would be killed incredibly quickly, and you really feel that within STEM. The game's difficulty, even on normal, is very challenging. You can be killed insanely fast if you slip up even in the slightest. While it can get frustrating at times, and I know it's an issue a lot of people had with the game, I personally love it. It makes you as Sebastian feel like you're nothing, like the odds are severely stacked against you, truly enhancing the horrifying threats you have to face. I just adore this shit, man. And I truly believe that The Evil Within is one of the best games ever made.
Are you injured? What happened here?
Can't be real.
Find myself within darkness twisting me around. There is nothing I can do. This world doesn't span. It just turns itself around and around. The night shows tight and can't breathe to straight. Long way down, suffocating endless rain. Long way down, long way down, long way down. Losing all I know. Hope is trapped and lost. Walking a tightrope bound to slip. Sound is a twisted lullaby. Touch is the slice before the night. Soon something's got to give in. Can lose control. Remember
The Evil Within is one of the best survival horror games you can play, and a few months back, I went into the base game of it looking at why it's so appealing despite its fairly poor reception when it came out, with critics not being able to handle literal peak at the time. It was too much for their fragile little minds. Probably got stuck on Laura or something. I mainly talk about why The Evil Within specifically appealed to me, and why it's my all-time favourite survival horror game, and that's something I can say with confidence. And I've played a lot of banging survival horror games in my time. Yes, that includes the Silent Hill 2 remake. I loved that game personally, and I'm honestly not sure how anyone can dislike it the amount they do. Well, even though The Evil Within was received with a mixed reception back when it came out, it was still fortunate enough to get DLC. To be specific, 3 DLCs, 2 of them being related to the story of the base game, expanding on unanswered questions people had at the time, and 1 DLC being a complete experiment, which is something more games should do, because experimental DLCs are usually peak, but we'll get to that when we get to that. The first 2 DLCs are called The Assignment and The Consequence. Within the 4 chapters of these, we play through the story from the perspective of Julie Kidman, and we get to learn the reasons as to why she betrays us near the end of the base game. She's been sent into the STEM system acting as an officer in training to get close to Beacon Mental Hospital. The reason why she needs to get there is because she needs to get to the patient known as Leslie. If you've seen my previous video, she's fully aware that Marcelo Jimenez is about to set off the wireless stem to pull everyone in, and you can actually notice this in the beginning cutscene of the base game, with her being the only one who barely reacts to the high-pitched noise over the police radio. We get some information early on that she's been sent in with the goal of finding Leslie by a shady organization known as Mobius. Mobius are actually very closely tied to the STEM system, wanting to use it to create a world they can control. Hence why they want Leslie, because of his similar brainwaves to Ruvik, thinking that maybe they can use his brain to control STEM and not have it be overrun by a psychotic lunatic.
We'll see how loyal you are when you know the truth.
Kidman was taken in by Mobius when she was a teenager, and the main reason why she was taken in was because she was seen as a disposable person.
What the fuck?
Which is why she was perfect for a job as dangerous as this. Obviously this isn't something she knows straight away, only learning this through a shadowy figure that I'm gonna get to later, fucking with Kidman and straying her off the beaten path of her job. Now, all of this sounds like a pretty great premise for a DLC, right? Seeing something as shifting and strange as STEM from the eyes of a different character, seeing what they had to deal with while you were shooting Haunted and scooping up green gel as Sebastian in the base game, and injecting that shit into your brain, giving you the incredible knowledge and power of holding more pistol rounds. I still don't get why this was an upgrade. Speaking of weaponry, you don't actually get any when you play as Kidman. Apart from the occasional set PC section. Kidman just doesn't get as lucky as Sebastian, because I mean, he finds an entire arsenal of guns throughout his journey. All Kidman gets is a flashlight, so you'll be spending most of your time trudging through STEM holding the crouch button as to not get caught. I have no idea how she can crouch and walk in those high heels. I guess she just wanted to slay in STEM. This is the main issue I have with these 2 DLCs. It's entirely focused around stealth and hiding, which is easily the least interesting element of the base game of The Evil Within. It means a lot of the gameplay sections boil down to you sneaking around and picking off a Haunted every now and then, whilst doing an objective that requires you to stand there gormlessly while holding a single button, praying to God you don't get spotted because you ran out of axes to stealth kill the remaining bastards lurking around. I guess they kind of expanded on the stealth a bit, letting you hug walls and lure enemies by shouting, and it's not the worst thing ever, but it definitely kills any form of replayability in my eyes. Luckily, there are moments within the DLC where Kidman does get a gun, and these sections are an absolute blast, literally. They are way too few and far between though, and it happens a whopping 3 times during both DLCs, which just isn't enough in my opinion. There's also this one bit where you see her pick up a gun she uses to aim at Leslie in the park, and you can see yourself, it has no rounds in it, yet she manages to shoot Joseph.
Joseph isn't dead.
What? I hope somebody gets fired for that blunder. Honestly, it was probably just a glitch in STEM. Yeah, that was it. Whenever there's a bug or an issue in this game, it's there for lore reasons. It's just STEM glitching. You know, speaking of the lore, the DLC introduces 2 new enemy types, and they do not disappoint in the design department, with one of them actually being one of my favorite monster designs ever created. It goes so fucking hard. But let's start with the new normal enemy, the Cadaver, which is Latin for corpse. Very fitting name because these things are literally just just swollen, shambling corpses that are formed from haunted that were left alone on the floor for too long. In their revolting, swollen state, they can't see at all, patrolling areas looking for other bodies to scran on. But this doesn't hinder them, because their lack of sight severely enhances their hearing, and if you make any form of sound, they will start glowing red and beeline straight towards you to explode. With those high heels on, the only thing I can say is good fucking luck, holy shit. Speaking of high heels, we got the best monster design ever created, Shade. Shade is this hulking figure covered in bloodstains that stumbles around in heels, constantly looking for you with its giant light for a head. It basically acts as Kidman's version of Laura, a stalker that you can't actually do much to, creating some of the most tense moments ever. Shade's representation within STEM is rather unique, as it's actually a manifestation of Kidman herself. It displays feminine qualities like wearing high heels, and it's covered in white clothing just like Kidman as she enters STEM. It's actually the first creature she sees as she enters, implying it appeared as soon as she was brought in, manifesting itself around her. It also represents Kidman's goal within the system too, constantly moaning Leslie's name as it looks around with its spotlight, exactly like Kidman is doing with the goal Mobius set out for her. While Shade is extremely hostile towards Kidman and anything around it, eating them if they get in her way,
that is bloody lovely.
she does actually guide Kidman a bit with navigating STEM, like how she shines a light on the Mobius symbol not too long in, showing that it can create doorways, which is an ability Kidman is able to utilize with her flashlight. Do you see the connections here? Any section with her is horrific. Hearing her stumble around on her high heels groaning Leslie's name as it looks for you, the developers knew how unsettling it was. Because there's multiple occasions where you have to fucking Dead by Daylight loop the twat as you wait for a door to open or a lift to come down. I hate this shit.
Please enjoy this music while waiting.
You've got to be kidding me.
Julie Kidman is a survivor in Dead by Daylight. Please, can we sign up? Can we make a petition? I despise Shade because she scares me, but I also love her because of it. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? You know? There's also this awesome Easter egg in the second DLC with her. Peak. Everything about this game is peak. There is actually a third monster that's new, and that's actually the administrator of Mobius, at least the shadowy manifestation of him. Technically, he is the overarching villain of the entire series, wanting to utilize STEM to control the world, and he was the one who betrayed Ruvik, cutting him up and using his brain to power the STEM system. Obviously, we know that Kidman has been sent into STEM with the sole purpose of getting Leslie out of there for Mobius, and Ruvik is very aware of this goal, tormenting her constantly throughout her journey, but the manifestation of the administrator is also doing so. The reason why he exists in STEM is because of a test Mobius is performing on Kidman due to their views on her being expendable. We see a scene early on of her being injected with some sort of serum, and this serum is what creates the shadowy figure of the administrator, one that's there to test the loyalty of members of Mobius, constantly making sure you're on track with what you need to do, and not being afraid to kill you if need be. Obviously Kidman doesn't know about this going in, but the more she learns and strays off the path, the more hostile the figure becomes towards her. Now, just like with the first video, I'm going to be going into headcanon territory here, and that headcanon is the fact I feel like Ruvik takes control of the administrator figure the further Kidman goes into STEM, constantly tormenting her with it. We get some hints that this is Ruvik, as during chase segments we can actually see shadows of Laura's arms reaching out of the shadow of the administrator. And if you already know, Laura is Ruvik's sister, and he uses her arms to his advantage a lot of the time throughout the game. It also feels like Ruvik uses the manifestation of the administrator to explain to Kidman that she's being used by them, exposing the truths of what Mobius has actually done to Ruvik, all the while she learns what his intentions for Leslie is, trying to use him as a vessel to escape STEM and enter the real world in a new body. Obviously this causes Kidman's goal to change from trying to save Leslie to killing him to try and put a stop to Ruvik, which also conflicts with the mission she was given by Mobius, in turn making the shadowy figure more hostile towards her because she isn't being being loyal.
Shut up and get out of the way!
One of Kidman's main fears is getting found out for her true intentions, and there's a section where Ruvik takes full advantage of every fear and emotion she's feeling about this. There's a scene where the administrator manipulates Kidman into believing that Joseph is dangerous, and he will find out the truth of what's going on with her, creating fear for Kidman that can be fully taken advantage of by Ruvik. One example is this bit from the base game you experience differently in the DLC. In the base game, the high-pitched ringing of Stem plays and Sebastian is pulled under, separating him from the others just after regrouping. However, from Kidman's perspective, this is what actually happens.
I know who you are. I'm not going to let you take him. You should have followed your orders, kid.
Ruvik uses this guilt and fear she feels towards Sebastian and Joseph against her. However, in this moment, he's only able to take control of Joseph, creating this boss fight of a cat and mouse chase where you need to find ways to sneak up on him and smack him in the back with an axe. In fact, regarding similar scenes,
Fuck this place.
it's always an absolute treat to see them play out from Kidman's perspective, letting you see all the differences. Because my god, there are quite a lot, and they fill in so many gaps and questions we had from the base game. Some of the sections even expand on Sebastian's backstory, telling us directly about his daughter and wife with a downright sick reveal at the end, that being spoiler alert, Myra, Sebastian's wife, is working for Mobius. It's all stuff that leads nicely onto the sequel, but we'll get to that. Sorry, I got a bit off track. Back to the DLC. I have one more thing I want to talk about, that being the artistic direction. Now, the base game of The Evil Within artistically is hauntingly beautiful. Horror games that enter the surreal almost always manage to take full advantage of the art direction, going absolutely insane with some of the shit they do with the environments. And The Evil Within is easily the best example of a horror game doing this. But I would argue that both of these DLCs, especially the second one-ups the base game in terms of its visuals. Some of these areas look outstanding. I can imagine on the screen right now, there are some nice scenic shots showing off what I mean. Like, some of these could be really nice wallpaper engine backgrounds. I'm just saying. Both of these DLCs are good, and they're definitely worth playing, especially if you're wanting to learn more about the world of The Evil Within, and if you want to understand what the hell is happening in the base game. Due to the run and hide nature of the gameplay, there isn't much reason to replay it, which is my only problem really. I only really had fun re-recording the footage for this because I hadn't played it in over a year, and truthfully, I almost forgot everything that even happened in it. Even then, I got a bit frustrated by some of the sections, but I appreciate them mixing things up and experimenting a bit. But the third DLC in The Evil Within fully embraces the experimentation. This is a DLC where you play as the Keeper, and you're basically on cleanup duty being manipulated by Mobius to go into STEM with the purpose of saving your daughter. But what Mobius actually wants you to do is take care of the creatures that still remain after Ruvik's departure. Why your daughter is in STEM to begin with is a question I have little to no answer for, because truthfully, I don't know, and to be honest, I don't really care, because I'm fairly certain this DLC isn't canon anyway. I mean, I don't give a shit, it's so much fun.
Oh, fuck.
You play from a first-person perspective, using your iconic hammer to smack Haunted about and throw them across the room. And while you're doing that, you're traversing the mansion that you most definitely have PTSD from Chapter 9 in the base game, going from arena to arena, taking down what's left in this hellhole, utilizing a wide range of different weaponry that you can unlock from a currency you get from murdering Haunted and bosses. I love the Executioner, man, it's so good. Yet, despite this, I don't have many words to describe how sick of a DLC it is. It's probably because you've already made a video about it before. Okay, best not to think about it right now, because it's an awful video. The Executioner, baby! Oh yeah! What did I say about thinking about it? Out of every survival horror game out there, I can easily say that The Evil Within is my favourite. In fact, I would even say that it is up there as one of my top 5 games of all time. And the more that I think about it, it might actually be my favorite game. That shifts around a lot, so me getting into this game is all thanks to E3 2017, where they announced a sequel to The Evil Within. They announced it with this beautifully animated trailer flexing the artistic prowess at Tango Gameworks, all accompanied by a haunting cover of Ordinary World by Duran Duran, which actually sounds better than the original song in my opinion. Man, Bethesda had a really good E3 that year now that I think about it. What else did they announce? Oh, never mind. After seeing this trailer at the time, I almost instantly bought the original game. And well, I mean, look where we are now. I'm probably one of the biggest Tango Gameworks shills on YouTube, and I'm proud of it. I wear that shit like a badge of honor. I also pre-ordered The Evil Within 2 right after finishing the original, waiting in pure anticipation for the months to go by so I could play it. And I actually didn't have to wait that long because back then, game companies weren't fucking stupid with the time they announced their games. Now, while I wait in anticipation for the game to come out, let's talk about The Evil Within comics. Yeah, this series has comics, and just like with the games, the art for them goes incredibly hard. I would hang some of these covers up on my wall if I could. In fact, I have one of them as a bootleg hoodie. I wear this in public. Specifically, I want to talk about the Interlude comics, as they mainly focus on Sebastian showing how he was after the events of the original game, branching the path to the sequel. The comic goes into the PTSD Sebastian is facing after his time in the STEM system, showing us how people have been reacting to the things he's told them, with everyone thinking he's completely insane and not taking him seriously at all. We also get to see him coping about Myra, his wife who went missing, as well as the loss of his daughter Lily. Things that were not blatantly told to us in the game, having the information be in collectible notes you can find. So it's really cool that they expand on this in the comics. We see him having to deal with all of this shit whilst also doing his job as a detective. So he's trying to solve a string of murders that he doesn't know is connected to Mobius and Beacon, with him having PTSD visions due to a part of him still being trapped within STEM when he goes to these crime scenes. Something I really like is how the art style shifts depending on if Sebastian is experiencing a vision or not. In the normal world, we get this dark noir look overlaid with a dark blue tint, making everything look cold, with the only colour standing out being red. Now, on the other hand, when Sebastian has a STEM-related vision, everything is covered in a red tint, contrasting with the blue one, and the art style also shifts, with everything being drawn in a much rougher, jagged way within the visions, which in my eyes is implying Sebastian can't quite make out the details of the things he's seeing, lacking comprehension just like his experience in STEM, whilst in the real world everything is drawn in a much cleaner, detailed way. It's a really nice comic, and I definitely recommend checking it out if you enjoy the series as much as I do. The main reason why I'm bringing it up is because the comic has a sole focus on Sebastian, like I said earlier, which is a complete contrast to the way the original told its story, focusing more on the world and everyone else, with Sebastian feeling like someone completely disposable, which definitely enhanced the horror in the original. I loved the approach they took with this. But The Evil Within 2 takes the comics approach, and this game is quite literally Sebastian's game.
Not this time.
Which is an amazing thing, but it's also pretty tragic. But we'll get into that. The game is finally out, and I've just finished installing it, so let's get into this. In the beginning of the game, we see Sebastian post where he was during the comics, sinking his sorrows away by drinking a copious amount of alcohol, trying to cope with the loss of his daughter Lily and wife Myra, suffering from frequent nightmares relating to the house fire Lily quote-unquote died in. Notice the silly quotation marks because Kidman teleports in front of him in his sorry state to let him casually know that his daughter is actually still alive, and Mobius is using her as a core for a new STEM system that has completely gone to shit because they lost contact with her, and two Mobius agents who also went in are also radio silent, causing a lot of chaos within the STEM system. Mobius were actually the ones who faked Lily's death, setting up the house fire that traumatized Sebastian, and they saw Lily as a perfect core for STEM because she's a child. It's basically a blank slate for them, and with her, they replicate an idyllic town where they have full control over everything, and that town is called Union. Kidman is there to ask Sebastian to go back into STEM to fix their shit, with the promise that he'll be able to reunite with and possibly save his daughter. Obviously, he acts very rationally and calmly about this request.
Lily is dead! I read the police report! I was at her funeral!
This is Mobius we're talking about though, so they don't really give Sebastian a choice in the matter. And this is how The Evil Within 2 starts.
Sebastian?
You're awake. Good.
Yeah. Great. Where are we?
It definitely feels like they took a lot of the complaints about Sebastian and the story from the original game to heart, because the sequel is the complete opposite of the first story. Like I said earlier, The Evil Within 2 is a game about Sebastian. It's not about Stem, Mobius, or everything else going on around him. No, this is about Sebastian and everything surrounding him. There's even some optional stuff relating to him that could actually muddy the water a bit regarding a third game, but that's just not going to happen anyway because Microsoft and Bethesda love sitting on an IP and doing nothing with it. Either way, I'll talk about that bit later because it is genuinely really good, and it's also got a bit of fan service in it that I really appreciate. You know, it's always nice to get a bit of fan service every now and then. While it's good they expand on Sebastian a lot in this game, it means that there's absolutely no focus or mention of what has happened to Ruvik within Leslie's body. You know, the cliffhanger in the original game. Oh, and while we're on this topic, what the hell has happened to Joseph?
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier.
The only thing we get in The Evil Within 2 is this slide where Kidman says,
Joseph isn't dead.
I don't really want this.
That's the last thing we ever heard about the guy. Or it will be, unless Tango gets the IP and we get a third game. It's always good to have a bit of hopeful thinking in your life, you know? Jesus Christ. At the time, a lot of critics actually preferred this approach to the storytelling, focusing more on the main character rather than the world itself. And whilst I do think the story of this game is really good, I definitely do prefer it in the original. I honestly think a lot of the focus on Sebastian and him having more of a personality takes away from the horror, especially with the fact he never shuts the fuck up now, constantly saying,
What the hell?
when he sees some weird fucked up shit. Sebastian's lack of a reaction to the horrific shit he sees in the original game made it scarier, and honestly, I don't really know why this is. I can't be the only one, right? I always prefer it when you play a horror game as someone who feels kinda like a blank slate, because them having a character and personality and reacting to the shit makes you feel more comforted because you're with someone, if that makes sense. Like Dead Space, for example. I feel like Isaac not reacting to anything in the original made it 10 times scarier than it is in the remake because, I don't know, him stomping around and swearing kinda takes away from the fear of the necromorphs lurking around. It's also why I prefer the horror of Resident Evil 7 because Ethan Winters is also kind of a blank slate, you know, he makes the occasional comment here and there like Sebastian did in the original, but for the most part, he says fuck all.
Dumb son bitch wasn't no good if it hit him!
And 7 is the scariest game in the series, so yeah, I hope I'm not the only one who feels this way. Another thing critics praised over the original was the gameplay. The original had a very jank feeling to almost everything, and there were moments that Sebastian had weird input delay that would cause you to fuck up and possibly walk into a trap. In the sequel, he feels way more streamlined to control, and not only that, but they heavily improved on the stealth, giving you more abilities to make it more engaging by combining elements they added in the DLC, like being able to hug walls. Another thing added was the fact you can find quite a big variation of existing weapons that have different attributes. Especially with the pistol, you can find shit like a silenced pistol to help with stealth, or a laser-sighted pistol, so you can pretend that you're Leon S. Kennedy just with a hint of severe alcoholism.
So what? You just gonna sit around here another week and do nothing?
I never make plans that far ahead.
Oh, and of course I can't forget Sebastian's trusty revolver from the first game, which you can only get from doing the little side event that I mentioned earlier. In fact, you're probably wondering how this game has like side quests and shit, and it's actually one of the biggest changes The Evil Within 2 made to the formula that the critics loved. And that's the fact The Evil Within 2 is a semi-open world game. Of course there are the linear sections we all know and love, with some of them being absolutely amazing with the horror. A big bulk of the game will have you spending time scouring the streets of Union, slinking around looking for any form of resource you can find, just to get by. You're gonna want to be doing this too, because exploring is how you find vital gear like the sniper rifle and the shotgun. Oh, and there's also a lot of random events that can easily be missable with fully animated cutscenes. There's a lot of detail and things to find in the streets of Union, and The Evil Within 2 does it incredibly well. Honestly, I don't actually know any other horror game that has nailed a semi-open world quite as good as this. You truly feel like you're scavenging for resources, surviving by the skin of your teeth. Not to mention how they spice things up later in the game, sometimes putting in roaming bosses that you had to fight previously.
Shit!
Having them roam around the entire area looking for you. Speaking of a roaming boss, there's one that only appears if you do a certain side quest relating to Sebastian's trauma within STEM. Yes, it's time to finally talk about this, and it's probably one of my favourite things about The Evil Within 2. So a bit of context here. If you spend a long time in STEM, it can slowly erode you mentally, making you see certain things that others don't. Now there's an entity within this version of STEM that manifests itself around this erosion, slowly stalking you down the more you fall into STEM, eventually draining you, and that's what has created the basic enemy types we see around Union. They're called the Lost, and they're a much more feral version of the Haunted from the original game, opting to charge at you and tear you apart rather than utilising weaponry and traps like the Haunted did in the first game. Their sporadic movement also makes it insanely hard to headshot them. Fuck! Back on the topic of the entity that hunts people down degrading within STEM, it takes the form of this ghost wearing a blood-covered dress, and it usually harasses its victim before turning them into one of the Lost by tormenting them with trauma they've been suffering from. Sebastian is a perfect candidate for her to torment, with her utilising the PTSD he's suffering from the STEM system in Beacon, not only by transporting the poor guy into familiar environments from that event and making him see his past self in mirrors, but also in subtle moments like when she's stalking Sebastian. You can faintly hear her humming Claire de Lune, which, if you don't know, was the music that played from the gateway mirrors leading to the safe room in the original game. It doesn't help that once you've triggered this side quest, she can randomly appear within the open areas of Union to hunt you down, and you know exactly when she does this because the screen gets covered with this ice-cold blue tint, and you can faintly hear her humming as she prowls the area looking for you. It's side content that I 100% recommend doing when you play the game, as at the end you get the satisfaction of Sebastian facing his trauma by physically shooting his past self trapped within STEM.
Huh. My trusty revolver. I haven't seen you in a long time.
This is an amazing way to contextualize the shit Sebastian has been going through since the events at Beacon Mental Hospital, and reading the comic amplifies it even more. I mean, even without the comic, it's still amazing to the point where I actually don't think it should have been optional. I'll get to that later though, because I think I need to talk about the actual plot of the game because yeah, how far am I into the video? Holy shit, okay. So aside from Mobius themselves, there are 3 main antagonists in this game, with 2 of them being Mobius agents sent into Union to protect the core, that being Lily. One person within these 3 had ulterior motives though, wanting to have control over Lily, giving him the power to quite literally rule over STEM and Union. This man was Theodore Wallace, a motivational speaker that Mobius originally hired to recruit people for the company. Yet despite his amazing speech check skills, he doesn't achieve his goal of acquiring Lily, so he uses his motivational speaker prowess to create an entire cult within Union, recruiting many of the citizens, one of them being the other one of the main 3 antagonists who I want to focus on more than Theodore because he's like 20 times more interesting. His name is Stefano Valentini, and he was the antagonist that was used the most within the marketing of The Evil Within 2. It was for an extremely good reason. Before he was put into STEM, Stefano was a war photographer who lost his eye due to an explosion he wasn't far enough away from. The loss of his eye was one of the main causes of his spiral into insanity, as well as the photo he took during the explosion. That photo being of someone being obliterated by it, and he became obsessed with freezing someone's death within photography, seeing art and beauty within that, which is an incredibly unique idea for a murderous psychopath. He joined Theodore's cult within Union, and he was actually the one he sent out to find Lily originally, which Stefano succeeded with. But he didn't bring her back to Fyodor, instead utilizing her himself, allowing him to create horrific art by using the unfortunate citizens within Union as his victims. He's actually the first threat we encounter within STEM, being an unstoppable force at the point we meet him, helping us learn stealth and all that gameplay shit. We also get to see some of his murderous art pieces. Utilizing the power of the core, he's able to suspend anything within his camera flash in time, and he uses this ability just as someone is dying, so it's constantly repeating their death over and over again. It's insanely fucked up and genuinely an awesome mechanic, which he utilizes throughout Union with tripwires and cameras on tripods. Only in a game like The Evil Within could a fucking camera be an overpowered weapon. The beginning of the game, and especially the linear sections focused around Stefano, are easily some of the best horror sections I've experienced. He's somewhat similar to Ruvik in the way that he likes to play with his prey before he swoops in to one-shot them. And he really likes fucking with Sebastian, forcing him to quote-unquote appreciate his morbid art constantly, as well as luring him into locations that are constantly shifting around him. It's proper psychological horror shit, it's great. It gets worse though. He has this monstrous creation that he refers to as Obscura, and it's usually lurking around the corridors of these areas. Now, Obscura is a monster that I really want to shine a light on in this video, and it's probably the only monster I'm gonna, because holy fuck, the design of this thing is insane. The creature is made of two female victims of Stefano that he's cut up and put back together into this weird tripod shape. It also has a camera for a head, a similar camera that works the exact same as Stefano's, letting it freeze its victims in place to create even more horrific artwork for the guy. Your first encounter with Obscura is a very unique boss fight. Your goal isn't to shoot it as much as you can to put it down like most bosses. No, instead you're trying to activate an emitter that'll restabilize a segment of Union. But Obscura doesn't want you doing that, taking a picture of it to freeze the progress of it turning back on. To stop this, you have to articulately aim at the lens of Obscura's camera as it skulks around looking for you. Doing so stops the freezing, and after doing that you have to run away and hide from the thing because you can't actually kill it. It's a very cool boss fight that feels insanely fresh, especially considering the fact there was one just before with this pile of flesh and heads called the Guardian that had you just running around and shooting like a traditional boss fight. Although something I want to point out is there is a way around the back of the building during this fight, and it lets you bypass the boss entirely whilst giving you a unique achievement. I always love this shit in games. More games need to do this, it's so cool. There's only one more encounter with Obscura after this. It's a section where you have to sneak past it to open up a gate, which is a very tense and well done section. Not too long after that you end up killing Stefano for good.
One last photo.
And the antagonist role shifts over to Fyodor, which is about 1/3 of the way through the game, because Stefano unfortunately suffers from Lady Dimitrescu syndrome. You know what I mean, right? A villain that is used for a majority of the marketing due to the fact they're incredibly unique and interesting, only for them to die within the first third of the game, despite the fact it felt like they were hyped up to be main villains. I do understand killing Stefano off though. I can imagine his whole artistic horror gimmick would have become pretty stale, but I don't know. Fyodor's gimmick is using Sebastian's trauma and guilt against him, which is good for developing Sebastian, and yes, his sections do it well with the story elements, but in terms of gameplay, there are some bits and entire chapters during this act that are just, well, to put it lightly, pretty fucking shit. Like this one where we have to hold out in a house with this Mobius agent that reminds me of every character from a Naughty Dog game combined. Constantly making quips and shit, feeling completely out of place in, you know, The Evil Within.
You need a break after that, old man?
Come on. Not that old.
To be honest, for all the Mobius agents, there's not much I can say. They're all pretty forgettable, and spoiler warning, they all die. Except for Sykes. We don't actually know what happens to this guy, but we'll find out in the third game, right? Right? In my previous video on The Evil Within, I mentioned how there was a reveal during the ending of the second DLC. That reveal being the fact that Sebastian's missing wife Myra was working for Mobius this whole time. Well, she's actually the third antagonist within Union that Sebastian has to face to get to Lily. Well, I say antagonist. She's not really one, but also she kind of is. Basically, she went into STEM with a goal to fuck over Mobius with the help of Kidman and Theodore. She wanted to get Lily out of there while setting off a transmission of some sort that would activate the chips implanted in every Mobius agent, killing them, so she and Lily could live a life carefree without having to worry about Mobius hunting them down. Theodore had ulterior motives at the time though, wanting to use Lily for power to take over Union, like I said, so Myra's goal shifted to focusing on protecting Lily within STEM, and the prolonged time spent within there started to corrupt her, only wanting to protect Lily and nothing else. It's why when Sebastian first encounters her, she's instantly hostile towards him, seeing him as a threat, which is not something you'd expect. At the end, she does accomplish her goal of taking down Mobius from the inside after regaining some sanity after Sebastian fights her in a weird ass monster form. It makes sense in the game, trust me, but unfortunately she has to stay behind to activate the transmission, meaning she dies just after truly reuniting with Sebastian. It's honestly really heartbreaking, especially considering what we know Sebastian has been through. All he really wants is to be a family again with his wife and daughter, but shit just can't go his way. Even before the events of Beacon, Mobius had already targeted him and his family, taking Lily away from him, which in turn pushed Myra away too. He just can't catch a break. Luckily though, he does manage to escape with Lily, which is a fairly happy ending for the guy, and it is satisfying knowing the fact that even if we don't get a third game, Sebastian is out there living a good life with his daughter. Or is he though? Because I have a small gripe with this ending, and I think there should have been two versions depending on whether or not you did the side quest where Sebastian takes care of the part of him lingering within STEM. Obviously this part of him is what kept him connected. It's most likely what was causing the hallucinations and visions within the comics, acting as a PTSD for the poor guy, constantly making him feel on edge. Now this quest is obviously optional, so there is a chance that people have beaten the Evil Within 2 without doing this, meaning Sebastian would have left STEM without neutralizing his trauma, so even with Lily in the real world, he would still be constantly haunted by STEM and the events that happened at Beacon, and I think there should have been an alteration in the ending that showed this. It didn't have to be something huge, like maybe the lighting could have been colder, just like it was when the entity hunted Sebastian down in Union, implying that part of him is still there. On top of that, it could have also shown Sebastian looking more depressed, despite the fact Lily is in his life again, and hell, this could have been a possible canon ending that would have drawn him back to STEM for a third game. I don't know, I'm just saying. Whilst we're on the topic of gripes I have with this game, I want to talk about the gameplay. Now, earlier in the video I praised the open world of the game and how it's probably one of the best ones out there of any horror game. See, I personally kind of resent the whole open world element of the sequel, and it's one of the main reasons why I've replayed the original twice as much as this one. After your first playthrough, the open world sections really drag, which is just a pretty standard thing for any open world game really, so I guess it can't really be helped, but it really puts me off playing this game again. So yeah, I am one of those people who prefer the original over this one, and I don't think anything will ever change my opinion on that. None of this takes away from the fact that Evil Within 2 is one of the best survival horror games you can play. I may not prefer it to the original, and I have a lot of issues, but a lot of them just come down to subjectivity with the game's direction. In fact, speaking of that, the sequel was actually directed by a different person. The first Evil Within was directed by the father of Resident Evil, Shinji Mikami, as almost everyone knows. But the reins of director were handed down to John Johannes, after Mikami was impressed by what he did whilst directing the DLCs for the original. And this makes a lot of sense because Shinji Mikami made Tango as a way to give new blood in the industry a chance to shine and show off their creativity. And he succeeded with flying colours because right after the Evil Within 2, John went on to direct Hi-Fi Rush, and we all know what I think about that game. I think I mention it in almost every single video now. I love it just as much as I love The Evil Within, which is why I think The Evil Within 2 is a tragic sequel. We could have had an amazing, downright incredible third game, directed by John learning from what he did with the sequel. I mean hell, for his first big directional debut, he did an incredible job, and after what he showed us with Hi-Fi Rush, I knew that a third Evil Within would have been so good, which is where the tragedy lies. We all know what happened to Tango under the wing of Microsoft. They shut them down without any hesitation. Thankfully though, the publishers Krafton saw the potential Tango had, just like a lot of us did, and they bought them up as well as the Hi-Fi Rush IP so they can make a sequel. The sad thing is, it's unknown if they bought the IP to The Evil Within alongside Tango, which means The Evil Within could be under Microsoft and Bethesda still, and we already know they aren't going to do anything with it, so I guess The Evil Within is going to lay dormant, and we will never get answers to the questions that still remain. Despite this, I'm still incredibly happy with what we have, and The Evil Within will always remain one of, if not my favourite survival horror series ever created, and I think The Evil Within 2 is an amazing send-off for Sebastian.
Come on out! Lily! Where are you? I'm here! Dad's here!
You weren't here for me, Dad.
I'm coming, Lily!
What has happened to Will? Crazy, some would say. Where is the life that I recognize?
But I won't cry for yesterday. There's an ordinary world. Somehow I have to find. And as I try to make my way to the ordinary world, I will learn to
Passion or coincidence once prompted you to say, pride will tear us both apart. Well, now pride's gone out the window, cross the rooftops and run away.
Are you coming with me or not?
I told you I wasn't going to leave this place. It's fucking evil out there.
That may be, but there's evil within, too.